I want to start as well with these. Thank you. With this other second slide, which is basically the link between the most important link between games and citizen science in the scientific literature. And, have you ever seen this kind of 3D visualization before? No? Okay. This is from a game called Folded, and it was a game designed to kind of engage people to design or to create protein structures. So it's a game designed to help scientists to figure out how to fold proteins and make models that exist in reality. But then you can just engage a lot of people to play a game, and then you have scientific results. So in this case, at the publication in 2010, they published that the task they designed was achieved in 15 minutes, and there were 52,000 participants, players. Now the game became kind of an indie type of game, so you have a niche community around it, and people keep playing it, and it kept its relevance. Okay, so just to demonstrate you that the role of games in citizen science can be really about, this type of activity. But what if the object of study is not like a piece of protein, but actually a city or a neighborhood? And then it gets us to think about like, okay, how can we engage citizens in thinking about the object of study when we have a city or a neighborhood, okay? And we can depart from the idea of participation. And this is the letter of citizen participation from Einstein, 1969. So you see that there's like a grade of participation in the process. And we have there, for example, degrees of tokenism, which is not really full participation, but you have these kind of engagement. And at the very top, you have degrees of citizen power, which is, let's say, how democratic can be the process. So you have partnership, delegated power, and citizen control. And now we kind of can participate way more in these processes of consultation because we have phones and we can, just record data and participate in a survey. So it's becoming faster and easier for us to really take part in any decision making, but we don't have this kind of engagement really occurring. Yeah, so the idea of the letter is to conceptualize public participation as a fundamental distribution of power. So how can we take part in the decision-making process? So genuine citizen control over political and planning processes. So planning is one of the elements for participation when we talk about citizen participation. Another reference that we have, this is quite famous among those who work with GIS and citizen science, which is the concept of citizens as sensors. So it kind of established the idea of how we can really become observers of the environment around us. And as citizens, we also have the right to, let the authorities know what we think. So these can be kind of combined somehow. So beyond just monitoring environmental elements around you, can really comment about what you think about the location where you live or where you work, your city or your neighborhood. And it comes to the idea to using VGI, the voluntary geographic information, right? So in this case, the citizen will use their daily experiences as the sensor for planning decision or to optimize consensus in the decision-making process in planning processes, urban planning processes in general. And then we have these, between the passive data mining, like I'm collecting data about monitoring environmental systems, to participating actively in the design process of the environment. So I'm acting as an agent, as an actor of the process of changing what is around me. So we can see that there's a merge here between citizen science and citizen design. So we can rely on citizen science approaches to achieve citizen design. So just to give an overview here, it integrates crowd-creative ideas into urban planning. So we're basically matching the design research questions from this area of study, like how can we better design the space around us, and use citizen science as a gateway to achieve that. So we have some sort of citizen design science. So what is the best method or process or strategy for engaging those that we want to reach out to in the process of designing and integrating this participation in the, let's say, results of the design. How can we get the ideas from the citizens and transform that into something that is really possible to be implemented as a fully operational design for any urban area. So in that result, we have, in the end, data that can be quantifiable, and it's also spatially explicit. So you can see where people desire certain type of changes or where people prefer to have certain type of interventions. And in this case, we have an opportunity to integrate this concept with gameplay. So we can integrate the gameplay process into the citizen sense process, and we can simplify these urban complex systems more accessible. So you can transform a very complex element like flood resilience in a neighborhood into something that local citizens can really take part and think about the solution and contribute and participate in the best outcome for their local area. So based on that, I want to touch a bit about the concept of game design and how we can really bring these concepts from game design in general into this process of participation. And I want to start with the magic circle. That's something that we sometimes overlook when we are playing games, because we're not theorists of games, we just play games, so we don't see that clearly. But basically, all games are a representation of a real system. So we can really interact with that system because we understand the patterns. But around that, you have a magic circle, which is a narrative, story, or something that will justify that game and the rules of that game. Example, what's the sense of like 22 people in the field kicking a ball, trying to aim at each other's goal? If you explain a rule of game like this, there's no like sense, but there's a magic circle around it. So at some point, it was designed to be a sport. So there was a justification around it. But for example, if I'm playing Super Mario and I'm eating mushrooms to get bigger, that's not real. But that's a way for the game to tell you the consequences of some actions. So you can create these elements in the game, and you see it goes through gameplay mechanics, player objectives, design context, and game aesthetics as the formal rules of game design. And it gets to the magic circle, which is the concept behind it. Okay? So how can I design a game that makes people really comment and share ideas about their local area, which is the real role? And by designing this narrative, we'll achieve some certain type of things like resulting outcomes, cultural influences. I can learn topics and develop knowledge, or simply develop skills. And these are really linked to the concept of serious games as well. Like you can design a game to be a training session for someone to learn something. And as I said, in this case, we're moving away from the formal elements, like how to properly design a game as a structure, towards a more how to design fun, how to design interaction, how to design playfulness. And that's like a way for it to make the engagement more natural. So our brains are trained to identify patterns. So if you present a new pattern to someone, but it's a game, it's kind of an automatic reaction to say, okay, I'm getting it. And then once you get it, you are in the flow state, you're playing, and you want to win or you want to collaborate. And these are puzzles that we want to play. We want to solve these puzzles. Okay, yeah, I mentioned this already. So serious games in that context is when you design a game for a certain purpose that is a bit beyond the entertainment element. So you can still have entertainment, but the ultimate goal of the game is to achieve a certain outcome. For example, a best design for something, spatial design, or Coded is an example. It's a serious game. So players are playing without knowing that the serious outcome is somewhere there in the game, as part of the game. In that sense, I mentioned it briefly. So games or simulations, they offer a really inexpensive and relatively unthreatening means of exploitation. So that makes it safe for anyone to test ideas. You know, when you play a game and you can die many, many times in the game, and you start from your last save point, that's the game kind of showing you that you can learn by trying out stuff. And there's no like real risk because the magic circle allows you to just revive yourself on and on and on. And we can do that for serious things as well. If we have planning scenarios that we can test, we can create a game, simplify the planning scenario to participants, and then let them test it, let them embrace the conflicts of this game, right? And this diagram shows how we are talking about the intersection of many things. So we have simulation, we have learning, and we have games. So these are separate things, but they combine. We have then serious games in the middle. So games are more about the design, like how you design this interaction. The learning is the outcome, like what you expect from this process of using a serious game. And the simulation is what system are you representing. We are going to play after the talk a game that is about coastal flooding. So the simulation is a simulation of a coastal flooding, but also the conflicts of a coastal flooding event. And in that context, I want to bring another concept that I've been working for a while now, which is GeoGames. And it's a subset of serious games where the mechanics of that game is deeply rooted in spatial mechanics. So you must have an element of spatiality to have this game operating fully as a GeoGame. And that kind of links back to the idea of VGI and GIS and all these things as well, because spatial data is the core element for GeoGames. And it can be literal representation of space or abstract. You can have these two elements there. So from this concept, we have this, let's say, piece of literature where you can really see how this concept has evolved. And we have these GeoGames and GeoPlay kind of element present as well, because you can include some other type of games that have a location as an element of the gameplay as part of the GeoGame concept as well. So these guys, they started all of this, and Christoph Schlitter, they started these concepts back then by just saying, okay, what if we transform a board game into a game in real space? Or how can I transform tic-tac-toe into a game that occurs in real space? That was like the precedence of Pokemon Go, right? And these are linked to location-based games. So the location of the person is the most important element. Okay? The difference between location-based games and GeoGames, in a sense, is GeoGames is a broader concept. So you can have a location-based game considered a GeoGame, but not all GeoGames consider the person's or the player's location as the key element of spatiality. You can have a game where only the spatiality of the system is the relevant element or some sort of representation. So this is an example, like you can play tic-tac-toe, use your phone, and you see the model of the phone. This is from 2006, so it's a while back, really before Pokemon Go, which is a hit. And we see that this is not a serious game because there's no real purpose behind it in terms of advancing in research or anything. But the company had their own intentions of using the game. They were like, okay, how can we make the best map of the world using people? So they created a game, Pokemon Go, and Niantic was basically mapping everything with everyone's cell phone because you have both the GPS location and the camera available through the game. So and by the end, they were like informing a platform with those data that collected by players, and they basically validated many just spatial data with the game. So it's a market game, but it had a serious purpose behind it, not for research, but for commercial purposes. Okay, it comes to the point where I start to talk about Minecraft. I have a question. How many of you have played Minecraft? Okay, raising. Yeah, nice. Half of the crowd here. So Minecraft is, I call Minecraft now a geo game by essence, because you kind of need to deal with the spatial elements in the game anyways, because it's about exploration, it's a simulation, right? So you have a simulation of landscapes, biomes, and everything. It's Earth-like simulations, that kind of game. So you don't have real landscapes in the game, but you can create real landscapes in the game using geospatial data. So there's this possibility. And because the game has been out for more than a decade now, you have a whole generation of players that learn how to interact with these virtual environments. So all the rules of the game, colors, textures, volumes, shapes, mechanics, they know everything. Even though the game has been updated on and on and on, if you play Minecraft in 2013 and you play now, you can still play the game because everything is kind of already communicated. You already have the rules. So I started using these as a way to kind of, okay, can we bridge this knowledge of players about the game with something real, something that is in real space? So we can basically combine Minecraft with maps because Minecraft has its own coordinate system and also mapping elements. So you can use a compact map. There's a cartography table. So you see the spatial element is present even in its own like native mechanics. And it comes to the point where we started this project here in UCD, Craft My Street. It was funded through our Tech Challenge in 2023. This funding is no longer active, but the project is still active. And we've been cooperating with the Department of Children, Equality and Disability, and recently also with the Don County Council by applying what we developed with this game, with this project, using Minecraft and other games. And it departs from this principle. We're basically starting from the participation framework for children participation in decision making, which is kind of a mandatory element for local authorities to include young audiences in decision making in all levels in terms of decision. So you have their space, voice, audience, and influence as key elements for the process for this framework. And we start to kind of, okay, can we combine that with some sort of framework with our approach with games, especially with Minecraft? So we departed from geospatial data, then we have a virtual element or environments, the space element. Then you have the meaningful experiences, which is basically the content you input in the game. So it's what is the game about? How do the players engage with the topic? It's about conflict, it's about cooperation, what type of mechanic are you putting there for players to really grasp the relevance of that topic. And then you have the game itself, mechanics and narrative, so that's the interaction. How they will interact with the meaningful experiences that we want them to have, right? And in the end, you have the social experience or the social readiness. So after you play the game, you know about the topic, you are engaged about that. You have kind of, you can expect to have some sort of shared knowledge about the thing because you played with other players. So you had to communicate your ideas. And that creates some sort of feedback, which is the engagement. So you can get some feedback also from the social experience of the game, but also through the game process as well, the game environment, you can extract data from that environment, from that virtual environment. And we call this participation outcomes because you can measure in a quantitative way how the meaningful experiences were achieved through the game element, the game elements in your input. And then to close the loop, you would have an output that is basically geospatial data that can be informed back to the decision-making process as data, right? And we recently published this paper where we basically demonstrate the application of this approach, and we call it a playful participatory planning system because it's a participatory planning system in terms of allowing participation in a planning element, but the playfulness is an element that comes first. So the playfulness needs to be designed for you to have the real outcome in the end that is kind of legible or relevant to the case. So we have here a scheme where we start with the geospatial data being transformed into a Minecraft replica of a target area. And that's the space for you to participate, for the young people participate. Then spatial tasks in the game and extraction of players' generated data. It's the voice in the audience. So players interact, you extract the data, then becomes the audience, and then you have the spatial representation and descriptive analysis of those interactions towards policymaking. So you have kind of reporting of that interaction that is, again, related to the other feedback that is outside the game as well. So these are a combination of qualitative data and quantitative data. Yeah, so you go from the spatial tasks to policymaking. So if a policymaker or a local authority wants to test an idea, they can inform the game design process to test how people will react to that idea through the game, and then you can collect some insights. Okay, now I'm going to move to one of the cases we have, the most recent one. It's with the Done Drum by Design. So this is just the youth engagement part of the Done Drum by Design initiative called Crafting Done Drum's Future. And we basically use Minecraft and board games to engage young people and children in the area to discuss about the redevelopment of the Main Street area and some other elements there. So the method was basically creating a process where the games are just elements in the process. They're not the process itself. So the combination of this engagement through games will, we would expect to achieve something in the end, not only collect data, but also engage the children and their parents in the process of participation. So we start with a mental mapping a game, then we have these collaborative mechanics present in these games. DLR gave us a list of urban furniture that they wanted people to test where they would like to have this urban furniture. So we created a repository where children could learn what is the urban furniture, how to design it in Minecraft, and how to really create it in the game later. So to achieve that, we use mini games and quests. So you have like small bits of playfulness between serious tasks, but everything builds up to an ultimate game, which is from analog to digital. And then in-game exploration is when they visit this replica of the drum, which is more detailed. They can leave comments. So there's a quest for visiting different locations, and the characters in the game will prompt like, what do you think about this? Or can you get to this location in this amount of time? So interactions that were implemented to engage participants to not only play Minecraft, but actually look around and pay attention to what is around them and comment about it. Like, you are on Main Street, close to the bus layover. What do you think about this space? Do you like the buses here or not? Things like this. Then we have an element of creative mode where they can really design. They can either destroy everything, but they can also build stuff. And the qualitative part of it is the note-taking element, because we are in a workshop with children. So all the interaction they have, like sometimes they're playing separate computers, but they're not using the chat. So they need to pay attention to what they're discussing outside the game as well. So we have people looking at the process in the room as well, not only in the game.
You want to ask a question, just when you were doing that particular one, could you change that, say, the weather environment? Because that could change the perception of how is this street furniture working for somebody who's not a bus stop with a shelter that's raining, whereas can that be done?
Yes, that's something really with Minecraft, yes. One example was that we were at the library, which is just around the corner there, with children at the library playing Minecraft, and it started raining outside. So I ran at the server and I triggered rain to start. So it's raining outside in here, so we must do something. So, you can trigger these kind of events to keep engagement high. And it's really effective, to be honest, because the environment like this, which is three-dimensional, and you have this really recognizable landscape, if you trigger something, people will relate to reality straight away. If it's like just sunny and beautiful, it's like, okay, it's just my preference. So we notice that this kind of interactions is quite relevant as well. So, okay, as I said, it's part of the Done by Design. So we have processes that are beyond the game. So we have these this is a geodesign workshop with adults. So what was done here was that the game process collected information that was basically the view and opinions and perception of the young population of the drum, informing the processes with adults in a later stage. So it happened between two geodesign workshops. So we had adults in the first moment, they produced some ideas. These ideas were also brought to the game. And then it was incorporated in the narrative somehow, like ideas that adults were presenting. And the information or the outputs from the game process was brought to the geodesign with adults again. And they had to respond to this input flow. They couldn't just ignore the comments from children and young children. And yeah, just to show you like the scale of it. So there was like a total of 169 ideas, many topics. So there's mobility, environment, and play. So this is from the whole process of the Done by Design. But we brought that into the game by starting with a mental mapping card game. So this is an exercise that triggers the game process, and they start by using their mental map to map out the village, map out the drum in this case. They have limited amount of cards, and they need to cooperate to create one single map. They cannot work alone and create their own map. So usually we start with the big table in the middle, and everyone kind of create this shared mental map of the village. And that helps them to kind of give some context. So you have roads, housing, open space for open and public spaces, commercial units, right? And then it comes to the board game after that. And the board game is this works more like a repository because we want to kind of link the mental map with the idea of urban furniture. So the color-coded squares are color-coded squares in Minecraft as well. So they would relate the icons with the colors with something in the game later on. So just to have some continuity in the process. And this is kind of the warehouse or the shop where you can just purchase urban furniture. And this is the rule. You have 3 points for purchasing urban furniture. Each urban furniture costs you 2 points. The third one, you need to combine with some other player to purchase the new one. So this is the collaborative mechanic that we included in the game to force them to socially interact and make decisions before going to the board and placing the ideas. And once they complete the board game part, they go to the exploring Main Street area. So we made a more detailed replica of the drum, where they could just walk up and down Main Street and visit some areas around. It was really about commenting, collecting data about what they think. So they would walk somewhere, type in the chat, and leave a comment. And the creative mode is a more simplified version, but it's about using the ideas from the urban furniture list and implement where they would like to have these things. This just to show you the process. So we would have the table in the middle, and they would start, okay, we are in the library. So where is the shopping center? Obviously, with the drum is about the shopping center, right? So they start to lay out the shopping center and say, okay, there's a road, Main Street, there's some housing here and there. So they start to discuss about the village, which is important because they're creating a mental map of the area. And then by playing the urban furniture catalog, they start to purchase interventions. Oh, a bench. Where do we need a bench in the drum? And then they would place somewhere close to the bus stop because there's no benches, something like this. And it develops in a sense that they start to lay out like a master plan for the design of the area. And that's all analog, that's all a very abstract representation of what they expect. And you see they have the board there as well, so they can recall the meaning of the items. And this is a log of what they decided to implement the most. So zebra crossing, you see they got 4, disabled parking, they got 5. So you see that there's some degree of preference for certain types of interventions. And then they go to Minecraft. And then Minecraft is about trying to convince them to really go to the location where they played on a board game, place ideas, and start to design. And then you see the board is there, so it's right after they started in Minecraft. And in Minecraft, there are a few rules that we establish, because this chat, for example, is the main channel of communication, but there's also a high risk of cyberbullying because of the chat. So we had to develop a lot of elements in terms of protection for that shared environment, especially at the library, because it was a pop-up event. It wasn't in a school. So this concern about ethics and protection in the virtual environment is also important when you're designing a game, especially for children. For adults, it's also relevant as well. And you see they start to comment things like the drum needs more spots for more teenagers to hang out. And actually, that's the ultimate comment that we had, because it was an agreement across young people, but also adults. They have parks for young children. They have cafes for young people in general, but not for teenagers. So for teenagers, they have the shopping center. So there's a lack of, what should you expect from me as a teenager to do in the drum other than going to the shopping center and, having fun. So this was an interesting output, but also they start to design like some stuff around the village. They identify some spots, on Main Street where they would like to have more seating areas, or disabled parking spots as well. Places to charge their phones, bus stop. I think this is 46A. Yeah, so they were just saying, oh, we need this bus. They want to have more bus lines for the drum as well. Sports for teenagers. The person who designed this is the same that made that comment. Like, I play sports, there's no option for me of a free area for me to go and play sports with my friends. So he designed this volleyball court. Yeah, this is let's say, community garden in a very specific spot in the drum, right in front of the library, close to the recycling bins. There's a kind of a patch of grass that is kind of underused. So the kids have, I'm going to create a vegetable garden there. And you see the library is over there in red, and then you have this strip of land that can be used, and it's not actually fully being used. Protection for kids crossing goes to the bypass. That was also something relevant that we heard, especially from young kids around 8 and 10 years old. They have some concerns about crossing to the library, which is expected to be accessible by this age group, right? And in terms of data, what can we extract in terms of data? I brought some examples here. So this is engagement with tasks. So the peaks show interaction. So we can measure placing blocks, breaking blocks, and also using the chat and interacting with all non-playable characters. So in this case, we had 2 workshops, and this is the creative moment. You see, we had 2 peaks. It was 2 workshops in one session. And these peaks are when they are really putting blocks, but everything is like commenting and interacting. And we can also log their location. Okay? And this is interesting because in this case, this is the creative world. So they start in the location and they can travel around by flying. But I'm going to show it at the end, maybe just to see if we have time to go through everything. But there's an animation that tracks the player location while they're walking, and that can be used also to assess some, accessibility routes or preferences for walkability, things like this. And the comments, you see, we basically transform everything that was generated in Minecraft back to geospatial data. So this is a map, it's not Minecraft anymore. And you see player 23, more flowers, more benches and trees. Maybe the location is a bit off, but what's important is the general perception, right? We can track where was the most active location as well. This is for commenting. So you see the red dot there is where they were interacting the most. So there must be something in that location where they recognize that there's a need. Yeah. And last but not least, because I'm running out of time, I want to just introduce also how we use analog games with adults in this case, but also applicable to children. We started to think, okay, how can we combine these orthogonal or voxel element or mechanic from Minecraft into analog games and replicate that as mechanic that we can exploit on and on and on, because people already know how to play with Minecraft, right? And we started to use then those to design specific games. We design game experiences with different mechanics. So we have negotiation, collaboration, and decision-making as key elements. And these games were designed for climate action as a process for climate action, for engaging and discussing about climate action. And we aimed at having very cheap and accessible materials for you to have the game ready for you to play. So dice, cubes, paper, and so on and so forth. But one of the games that we designed is the Craft My Post, and you see the board here, and we have a digital version as well. The board shows that this in blue is the shore, the red dots are settlements, and the game is a simulation of a flood. So while you're playing, blue squares will start to appear on the blue area at the top, and you need to take action in the shore, in the land, to make sure that you're not going to lose any settlement. But the game goal is the discussion. The idea of the game is not to beat the flood, is to how you as a group will react to the flood, what decisions are going to make. And that was designed to inform a subsequent process with after the game is finished. So everyone has this kind of idea of the process of the system, the consequences of actions, and the relevance of for example, not having a specific policy for reacting to something, things like this. And as part of the project as well, we were aiming at having something to inform processes in general. So we had this children's research advisory group in the project, and they were really helpful to let us know what is fun and what was not fun. So we had we tested with them these analog games, but also we tested the Minecraft game for building docklands. There we simulated the flood, the coastal flood. So the water would raise and players had to kind of stop the flood or adapt to the flood. But we failed in constructing a really compelling narrative for that game. So the board said, it's too much drama, we don't like it. So we had to kind of, okay, maybe we need to consider that, maybe climate anxiety is another thing that game that we should avoid, things like this. But we published this policy brief, just showing how effective things can be in terms of amplifying children's participation. And this year, in May, we're going to have the third Geo Games Symposium, and this is a third edition, but the second edition was here in UCD last year in June. And it's basically, we're trying to establish this community around people interested in developing, applying, or researching games, or if you're curious about it, registrations are open. We have option of online and in-person. Submissions, unfortunately, are closed already, but we have the proceedings from last year published in the UCD repository. So you can look it up on UCD repository and get the proceeding from last year. And I think it's time to play, guys. We're going to play Grab My Post. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to stop the recording now, but if anybody's online and would like to ask a question, you can type it into the chat. And if there's anybody in the room that would like to ask a question.
Now is the time. 44B bus, not 46.
Anybody here got a question? Oh, very good. So the online people can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. That was very interesting. Great. No, my question is like, because you showed, then you move from Minecraft environment to GIS. That is data you downloaded and then you open the GIS, or is part of the same? Because I'm not so familiar with Minecraft. Sorry.
The process of closing the loop is connecting the server database to
Okay.
GIS somehow. So
Ah.
we basically